It was supposed to be the beginning of a new chapter, a culmination of years of backbreaking work, relentless nights, and sacrifice stacked like bricks into a fortress of purpose. Alexandria Cole, the black woman behind Apex Nova Technologies, stood at the threshold of what should have been the greatest triumph of her career, a $900 million acquisition by the Braxton Consortium, a family so steeped in wealth and generational entitlement that their name alone moved markets, a dynasty built on privilege and gilded arrogance. Yet here she was, a woman forged in the furnace of struggle and brilliance, standing in the grand halls of their Greenwich compound like a storm in silk, her every step a contradiction to the assumptions baked into the walls around her. Raised by a single mother who cleaned offices while telling her daughter, "Don't just get a seat at the table, own the whole damn building." Alexandria had internalized those words not as ambition, but as law, and Apex Nova was proof, born from a one-bedroom apartment in Atlanta with a refurbished laptop and code written between double shifts and ramen dinners. Now a technological juggernaut at the bleeding edge of artificial intelligence and predictive systems, a company whose very DNA was innovation, precision, and integrity. And yet, as she entered the Braxton estate alongside her CFO Harold Mendez and legal counsel Olivia Tran, both sharp, loyal, and as seasoned in corporate war as she was, she felt the shift in atmosphere before a single word was spoken. It was in the air, heavy like smug humidity, in the glances tossed like lint, in the performative smiles stretched too thin across faces that had already decided who she was and where she belonged. The room, a marvel of marble and chandelier excess, was filled with over a dozen white men in suits that cost more than most people's mortgages. And at the head sat Eleanor Braxton, a matriarch frozen in pearls and judgment, her spine so rigid it seemed allergic to change, her fingers curled around the table like she could crush the future into a more palatable past. "Coffee would be great, sweetheart," Tyler Braxton muttered without lifting his eyes from his phone, his voice lazily entitled, expecting obedience like a spoiled prince unaware the kingdom had changed hands. Harold shifted uncomfortably. Olivia's nostrils flared. But Alexandria, whose heels clicked with purpose across the polished floor, blinked once, slowly, and said with a voice as calm as a loaded gun, "I'm Alexandria Cole, the CEO you're about to give $900 million to. But if it's caffeine you need, there's a vending machine downstairs." And the silence that fell was thick enough to chew, hanging just long enough before it cracked under the brittle sound of Douglas Braxton's chuckle. "Well," he said, voice dipped in condescension and age-old sexism, "someone's feeling herself today. Relax, honey. This is big boy business. Let's not get emotional." And with that, the tone was cemented, the insult sharp but practiced, part of a culture that cloaked its bigotry in boardroom etiquette and called it tradition. And for the next hour, Alexandria endured a masterclass in microaggressions, outright dismissals, and subtle sabotage. They spoke over her, challenged numbers they hadn't read, reduced her name to Alex, as if cutting syllables stripped her of authority, suggesting structural adjustments to the post-acquisition team that conveniently eliminated her, as though the woman who had architected the very foundation of the company was somehow now its least qualified voice. Each slight came dressed in a smile, each dismissal paired with a chuckle, and when she presented Apex Nova's forecasts, flawless, market-backed, and verified by independent valuation, they still asked if her team had done the math, or if they should bring in a neutral third party to verify. And then came the whisper, the one Tyler Braxton leaned to deliver to his cousin, but made sure Alexandria heard. "She's got that diversity grant vibe, you know?" And in that moment, something ancient and volcanic stirred in her chest. Not rage, she was too experienced to waste energy on rage, but something more precise, like a knife forged from every slight, every underestimation, every teacher who looked past her, every investor who asked to speak to the real CEO, every panel she wasn't invited to, every article that called her impressive for a woman in tech, every moment she had to smile through poison because the stakes were too high for emotion, because being black and brilliant and female meant being 10 times better for half the recognition. And now here they were, talking about her legacy like it was theirs to price and prune. And so when the laughter died and the air thickened with smugness, Alexandria stood, not abruptly, not theatrically, but with a stillness so absolute it silenced the entire room, and with calm, measured breath.
The fallout from Alexandria Cole's exit was immediate, volcanic, and felt across every corner of the financial world like a sonic boom shaking the pillars of old power. Because within hours of her walking out of the Braxton estate, whispers turned into headlines, and headlines into firestorms. Top tech CEO walks from $900 million deal over alleged discrimination, diversity token. Black woman CEO says no more. Alexandria Cole, the billion-dollar stand heard round the world, and though the Braxtons scrambled behind closed doors to spin it, to paint her as emotional, irrational, and unwilling to negotiate, they were blindsided by what happened next, because Alexandria didn't retreat, didn't explain, didn't apologize. She went on offense with surgical grace, stepping in front of the cameras during a packed press briefing streamed live to millions, wearing a deep navy power suit, her looks wrapped in a crown of fierce dignity, and her voice steady and smooth as she laid bare the truth, not with venom but with fact, with poise, with a kind of unshakable clarity that can't be described. Not just what was said in that boardroom but what it meant, the layers of systemic erasure, the disrespect cloaked in smiles, the economy of exclusion operating at full volume in plain sight. And when a reporter asked why she didn't just ignore the slights for the sake of the deal, she leaned forward and said, "Because I'm not here to rent my power, I'm here to own the room." And that quote alone detonated across the internet like a liberation anthem, igniting hashtags, panels, op-eds, and think pieces, with celebrities reposting it, students quoting it, and CEOs, both allies and opportunists, suddenly desperate to stand in proximity to her fire. But while the public discourse swelled, Alexandria was working, quietly, ruthlessly, methodically executing the plan B she'd built months earlier as a failsafe for exactly this kind of sabotage, because she'd never trusted the Braxtons fully. Not really. She knew the way old money worked, how it moved like smoke, never speaking its prejudice aloud but carving it into policies, structures, and contracts. So she'd quietly built relationships with sovereign funds, socially conscious VC, and international tech alliances who were tired of the old guards games and eager to place bets on founders with vision. And within 72 hours of her public stand, Apex Nova had secured not just alternate offers but better ones, $1.20 billion valuation, full founder control, equity stake expansion for staff, and a new partnership with a South Korean infrastructure firm that promised to scale the company globally without stripping its soul. And yet, even in triumph, Alexandria knew the battle wasn't over, because the Braxtons hadn't taken the humiliation lightly. Behind the scenes, they began to pull strings, call in favors at banks, whisper her name with poison, suggesting instability, unreliability, anything to spook investors or discredit her brand, which led to what happened on Friday morning at Beacon Trust, a private bank where Apex Nova held operating accounts, vendor disbursements, and payroll. When Alexandria, wearing her weekend casuals and stepping in to authorize an urgent 7-figure wire transfer, was stopped cold by the assistant manager, a stiff-lipped man named Gerald Withers, who looked her up and down like she was a trespasser instead of one of their largest clients, and asked, "Are you authorized to access these funds?" And when she calmly handed him her credentials, photo ID, and biometric clearance, he glanced at the system screen, furrowed his brow theatrically, and said, "We'll need to verify this with someone from Apex Nova," to which she raised an eyebrow and replied, "I am Apex Nova." But he smirked, waved over a security guard, and said, "Please step aside, ma'am, until we can confirm with your employer." And that's when Olivia arrived, having just parked, and watched in horrified disbelief as Alexandria, her client, her friend, the woman who had built a billion-dollar empire, stood being questioned like a petty thief, with patrons in the lobby beginning to murmur and phones subtly filming. And Olivia's voice cracked like a whip as she demanded Gerald check the company's ownership ledger, at which point the manager finally stumbled into the realization that the black woman he'd humiliated was the employer, the CEO, the sole controlling shareholder of the company, holding tens of millions in deposits. And he stammered out apologies soaked in panic. But Alexandria didn't rage, didn't shout. She simply took out her phone, dialed Beacon Trust's chairman directly, and said, "This is Alexandria Cole. I was just denied access to my own accounts. I expect the full board on a video call in 1 hour. Wanda, I'll be transferring every cent from your institution by close of business." And as she turned to walk out, her voice steady and low, she added, "Your employee didn't just insult me, he insulted everyone who looks like me. Fix it, or I will." And in that moment, every person in the bank lobby stood not just in silence but in the presence of power. Not the loud kind that shouts and bullies, but the undeniable world-bending power of a woman who knew exactly who she wasn't exactly what she owned. By the time the video of Alexandria Cole calmly walking out of Beacon Trust went viral with millions of views, split-screen commentary, and captions like "This is what power looks like," the boardroom at Beacon was in chaos because her call to the chairman had set off alarm bells no PR firm could muffle, and within hours, major clients began pulling their assets. Journalists camped outside their headquarters, and every bank executive with a stake in the institution was scrambling to draft talking points that could salvage the crater she'd left in their credibility. But none of them were prepared for what happened next. Because Alexandria didn't just move her funds, she moved the culture, launching a blistering equity audit of Beacon Trust with receipts, internal reports, diversity failures, loan discrimination, statistics, and a side-by-side analysis showing how legacy clients were granted advantages that women and minority-owned businesses were denied. And while the bank pleaded for a closed-door meeting, Alexandria insisted everything be live-streamed public accountable, and in that live-stream, with CEOs, regulators, and analysts watching, she dismantled their excuses with the precision of a woman who'd sat at too many tables where her worth, it had been underestimated, her voice ignored, her name mispronounced, and now, every word she spoke was a reckoning, exposing not just Beacon but every institution that profited from exclusion while preaching diversity. And as she finished the presentation with one final blow, an announcement that she was creating a new financial alliance, a tech-driven, ethics-enforced bank for underrepresented founders, with $500 million in initial capital already pledged, her name began trending in 47 countries, investment apps surged with support, and black and brown entrepreneurs began flooding her inbox with gratitude, proposals, and tears. Because for the first time they didn't feel like they were asking for a seat, they felt like they were being handed the keys to build their own house. And while the Braxtons watched in stunned silence as Alexandria became the face of a new economic movement, their empire began to crack. Board members resigned, their stock plummeted, and one by one, partners began to abandon them for Alexandria's vision, not just because it was right but because it was profitable, scalable, and backed by something their old-world power couldn't manufacture: trust from the next generation. And in the middle of it all, Alexandria remained calm, focused, unshaken, because she wasn't fighting to be accepted anymore. She was building something bigger, something unstoppable, something that couldn't be cancelled, voted down, or whitewashed out of history. And when asked in a live interview what she would say to Gerald Withers, the banker who'd tried to humiliate her, she paused, then smiled slightly and said, "Thank you for reminding me that I don't need permission to lead." And that quote etched itself into history books, motivational speeches, and the hearts of every young girl who'd ever been told she wasn't enough, because Alexandria had taken what was meant to break her and turned it into the foundation of a new world, one not built in the shadows of old money, but rising boldly in the light of new legacy. It had been 6 weeks since Alexandria Cole walked out of that bank and set afire to everything that dared deny her dignity. And now the skyline that once loomed over her like a fortress of old money was being rewritten with her fingerprints, her vision, her legacy. Because on that sunny Monday morning, the city buzzed as reporters, entrepreneurs, veterans, educators, and even children gathered outside a towering new glass structure downtown with the name Cole Financial Freedom Center gleaming in gold across its 12 stories. And as Alexandria stood atop the grand staircase with Olivia, her longtime assistant turned coup, and her mother, the retired schoolteacher who once fed hungry kids from her own paycheck, a hush fell over the crowd, not from fear but reverence. Because they weren't just witnessing a ribbon cutting, they were witnessing history reclaiming itself. And when Alexandria took the microphone, her voice rang clear and steady over the city. This is not just a building, it's a declaration that we will not wait to be invited in. We will build, we will own, we will lead. And the applause that followed was thunder, not just from the people in front of her, but from those watching across the world. Single mothers starting businesses from their kitchens, black founders in Silicon Valley bootstrapping, without backing, young girls staring at their screens with wide eyes because someone who looked like them was winning without apology. And as Alexandria led a tour through the sleek halls filled with minority-owned startups, incubator labs, free financial literacy programs, and artwork from young black creators, every wall hummed with the spirit of possibility. And outside, the headlines broke again. Alexandria Cole becomes youngest black woman to launch a chartered financial institution, while the Braxtons sat in silence behind drawn shades, watching the very market they tried to control pivot away from them. As investors fled their firm for Alexandria's ecosystem where profit met purpose and power no longer had to wear a mask. And the final blow came days later when Beacon Trust, once a cornerstone of generational wealth, was acquired by a progressive fintech firm that proudly credited Alexandria's audit and public pressure for exposing the rot at its core, leading to federal reforms in banking access and executive hiring mandates that would forever change the industry. But the real victory wasn't in the policies, it was in the people. The way communities once ignored now surged with confidence, funding, and ideas that had been caged for too long. And late one night, as Alexandria stood alone in her office overlooking the glowing city, She opened a letter slid under her door, handwritten by a 12-year-old girl named Malia. I saw you on TV. I want to be like you. My mom said we couldn't open a bank account, but today we did. At yours. Thank you for making space for us. And in that quiet, with tears rising in her heart full, Alexandria smiled. Not because of the billion-dollar headlines, not because of the banks she shook or the families she outmaneuvered, but because of that one little girl who no longer saw power as something far away, but as something she could grow into, wear proudly, and wield with purpose, because Alexandria Cole hadn't just fired those who disrespected her. She had replaced their entire system with something bolder, blacker, and built to last.